Did you tweet me an article? Did you tweet me an article at Ron Placone? Good morning, YouTube. We have a guest today. We have Pat Harris is going to be hopping on with us on the stream shortly. So get ready with your questions for Pat Harris. You guys know the drill whenever we have a guest. Welcome to Get Your News On with Ron, by the way. I am Ron Placone. This is the world's first viewer-curated streaming news show. What does that mean? That means you guys tweet me articles. We go through them together, and that's how we get this show going. Today, we have a guest. So what does that mean? That means you guys submit questions over on Live Me or on YouTube, and we feed them to the guest. Our guest today is Pat Harris. Pat Harris is running for Senate here in California against Dianne Feinstein. Now, the complicated thing here is that there's three other progressives, well, him including, there's three progressives including him, so there's two other progressives also running in this race. And man, if we split the progressive vote three ways, there's a good chance none of them will make the runoff. So we talked about that issue with David Hildebrand, who's running against David. We're going to talk about it, or excuse me, David Hildebrand, who's running against David. David Hildebrand, who's running against Pat. And we're going to talk with Pat about it too. We're hoping to get every Senate candidate. You know what? Fuck it. At first I said every Senate candidate except for Dianne Feinstein. I'm adding Dianne Feinstein to the list. I want to talk to Dianne Feinstein too. She is 192 years old. So I'd be surprised if she owned a computer, let alone knows how to use Google Hangouts. But I think it's worth a shot. We're going to try to get Dianne Feinstein up on this. She is pretty right-wing. It'll be an interesting chat. But we're going to try to get Dianne Feinstein up in here. Let's see. I don't think we've not had them. All right. So we got one article that we're going to hop onto because it's pretty breaking news. So some Russians were indicted. This is from 14 minutes ago. Some Russians were indicted in special counsel Robert Mueller's probe of election meddling to support Donald Trump. Special counsel Robert Mueller's office said Friday that a grand jury indicted 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian entities for alleged interference in the 2016 presidential elections, during which they boosted the candidacy of Donald Trump. The indictment says that the defendants by early to mid-2016 were supporting the presidential campaign of then-President Donald J. Trump and disparaging Hillary Clinton. Okay, that's very vague. An announcement from Mueller's office said that the government accuses all the defendants of conspiracy to defraud the United States. 3 defendants are charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and bank fraud. 5 defendants are charged with aggravated identity theft. All right, we'll see what happens here. 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian entities. All right. So this is still unfolding. And we'll see what transpires here. This will prolong Russiagate indefinitely. I mean, the fact that they actually got supposedly got, I mean, again, this is 14 minutes old, this story. All we know so far, there's 13 Russian nationals, 3 Russian entities. This is alleged interference. Now, here's the actual verbiage of what they're being accused of. Supporting the presidential campaign of then candidate Donald J. Trump in disparaging Hillary Clinton. So that could just mean, and with the way this has been going so far, this could just mean Facebook ads. This could mean some people in Russia bought Facebook ads that were pro-Trump. Is that possible? Of course it's likely. Russia's a huge fucking country. There's people in Russia that are interested in American politics. There's people, and Pat is here. What's up, Pat?
How you doing, Ron? Good to see you.
Good to see you, buddy. Somebody had a breaking article that they sent me, so we went live a little early and figured you could just jump in.
Love to. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for being here, man. So here's the way this is going to work. First of all, did you hear that apparently there are some Russians that have been indicted by Mueller? That's the breaking news that we had to kind of jump to.
Yeah, I was listening to CNN just a little while ago, and they were just breaking into it. So I don't know the details yet, but yeah, just kind of.
There's not much yet, so we don't really have much to say as of right now. We're kind of learning. Of course, the wording is incredibly vague. What they're actually being accused of, and it's apparently 13 nationals and 3 Russian entities. Apparently, they quote-unquote supported presidential campaign of then-candidate Donald J. Trump and disparaged Hillary Clinton. That's what they've been accused of, which is beyond vague and may or may not be anything. But I don't know. What's your take on Russiagate as a whole? We'll start it out with something very light.
Yeah, right. Well, my whole thing with Russiagate is let this play out. I think that part of the problem is we're allowing the Republicans to sort of attack Mueller and go on and on and on. I get that they're going to do that. We did somewhat the same thing with Kenneth Starr back in the day with Bill Clinton. Let prosecutors do their jobs. I'm in the criminal justice system. I've been working with U.S. attorneys for years. Let them do their job. When the time comes, and it looks like it is coming, when the time comes, we're going to see what happened. We'll get a much better idea. And there's nothing that Trump or the Republicans are going to be able to do to defend it. If the evidence is there, they're going to get nailed. And that's just the bottom line. So my sort of thing is, I think we need to be talking about other things. I think we need to be talking about exactly what's going on in this country and the problems we have with income inequality and the problems we have with things like gun control, as we saw yesterday. Those are the issues we ought to be talking about. Let's let Mueller do his job, and it'll all work out in the wash.
So basically, I feel like we're on the same page then, where it's like, look, this whole McCarthyism, Red Scare nonsense and amplification 24/7 by the media is grossly irresponsible. If people want to investigate it, that's fine. Let them investigate it. And when we have something to actually report on, let's talk about it then. Is that a good summary?
You said it much better than I did. That's exactly right.
All right. Well, thanks so much for. So the way this is going to work, you'll notice me looking around a little bit. It's not because I'm not paying attention to you. It's because there are people submitting you questions from 2 different platforms. There's some people that are watching me over on my phone on a streaming app called LiveMe, and there's also people watching this live on YouTube right now. And they're all submitting you questions. My goal is that most of the questions you take are questions submitted from the viewers. Very few of them are going to come from me. So while you're answering, you're going to see me looking around and stuff like that. It's not because I'm not paying attention to you. It's because I'm taking questions. So guys, get your questions ready for Pat Harris. Who is Pat Harris? I already told you guys who he is, but I'm going to let you tell him who he is in his own words. Pat, give everybody your 411.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Essentially, I'm running for the United States Senate in the seat currently held by Dianne Feinstein. I have spent the last 25 years of my life as a civil rights and criminal defense attorney, mostly across California, some cases across the nation, but mostly in California. I'm based out of Los Angeles. I have been doing this where pretty much full-time in terms of civil rights in the last 7 to 8 years specifically. I've taken on everybody from corporations like Pfizer, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. I took on a very famous case where I took on the Catholic Church over the abuse of children. I was involved actually in taking on Kenneth Starr back in the 90s on the Whitewater investigation. So that's pretty much what I've been doing with my life. Is I had the opportunity when I came out of law school to go work for a corporate firm. I decided that's not what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to represent people who didn't have a voice. So I went to work instead for a public defender's office in Nashville, Tennessee. And that's been my life, is representing people that I feel like need a voice. And I've loved it, but now I feel like there's a lot of people in this state of California that don't feel like they have a voice.
You know, based on the accent, I thought you were British, but so Nashville, I used to live in Nashville too, man. So that's really cool.
Then if you lived in Nashville, let's see, do you know Zany's Comedy Club?
That was my home. That was my home. Yeah, Zany's Comedy Club. The folks that run that place were very, very good to me when I lived there. And, when I lived there, I did an internship there when I was in college. I interned at a record label and loved the city, fell in love with it. And then years later, when I was kind of just a road comic, traveling the country, doing comedy, my girlfriend at the time wasn't super thrilled with where we were living. I wasn't either. We were back in Pittsburgh because I just finished grad school there. And we were kind of anxious to go somewhere else. she really loved the idea of living in Nashville. It was a pretty easy sell for me too. So we moved down there. I traveled a lot when I was there. Like I was out of town about 40 some weeks a year, but it was a really fun place to be when I got to spend some time there.
It is a great place. And I got to tell you, it's kind of funny because when I was in my 20s and before I decided to go to law school, I was doing a number of different things. And I actually bought a franchise for a comedy club. I bought a Zanies franchise and opened the first comedy club in Little Rock, Arkansas. So all the people at Zanies I'm very familiar with. They're great people. They were terrific. Unfortunately, I ended up starting it out as very successful and then making a very dumb decision, which cost me the club and I ended up closing the club. But it was a great experience and a lot of fun. So sometime when you and I have a chance, we'll sit down at lunch and we'll talk about the people at Zanies.
Well, yeah, I would love that. And so you have experience in the comedy business, and now you're gaining experience in comedy's stepchild politics. So you're covering the wheel, my man.
I can tell you which one's a lot sadder. I know that. That's for sure.
Life of a comedian is tough. Yeah.
Yes. It is.
All right. So we got some questions for you. First of all, and this is pretty topical right now. It's always very topical, unfortunately, because we've had a shooting almost every other day so far this year. But people want to know your stance on gun control.
I think we have to do two things. First of all, I believe very strongly we have to have a ban on assault weapons, period. I don't think there needs to even be a discussion about that. But I think the problem with the Democratic Party has been the way we presented it and the way that we actually go about trying to get legislation passed. We come at it from an angle of gun control and the concept that we're going to pass legislation to ban this and ban that. And you put Democratic senators out there who are symbols like Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein, who are symbols to a large part of the country of the Democratic establishment. What we need to be doing is we need to understand that the largest group, the most vocal group against assault, against banning assault weapons, are police officers. Police officers hate assault weapons. Many of the chief of police of many large cities have actually come out in favor of banning assault weapons. That's who we need to be putting out in front, talking about this issue and talking about banning it. Because if there's one thing that beats the NRA among conservatives and independents, it's police officers. They respect them. They look at them and think that these people would first and foremost have an understanding of weapons. That's who we need to be putting out there. But I will tell you, I have to say, after watching what happened in Parkland, those kids were also incredible. They were on doing interviews. They were powerful. Those were smart, intelligent young people. That's who the kind of people we need to be putting police officers, young people who've been through it. That's who needs to be the face of this. It doesn't need to be a lot of old politicians from the Democratic establishment. That's how we're going to get a ban on it.
All right. What is your opinion on NAFTA?
I'm sorry. Am I still on?
NAFTA. Oh, you're on.
Okay. I thought I lost you there for a second. I have been opposed to NAFTA from the beginning. I think that the problem with NAFTA was that it was originally set up so that the corporations could, in fact, take their labor elsewhere, and which is what they've done, take it to cheaper places. We have, I think, over the last 20 to 30 years, we have let unions down repeatedly. Instead of the Democratic Party supporting unions who have supported us for all those years, we've repeatedly let them down. NAFTA is a classic example. Now we have NAFTA, so step one needs to be we need to try and come in and fix it as best we can by modernizing it and talking about all the things that are much different, obviously technology-wise, that have changed since the 1990s, since it was passed. But I opposed it in the beginning, and I still oppose it now. And trade pacts like that take jobs out of the country and hurt unions are one of the reasons I think the Democratic Party is where it is today.
So I'm gonna switch gears here real quick, just because sometimes we do discover breaking stuff on this show and we unpack it together live. So DC mentioned here in the live meet chat, DC 420 mentions that those indicted on this whole Russia thing were also connected to the apparent troll farms that are going on over there. So it is in connection with all that. And so far, that's all we know. We'll see what else props up. All right.
Indictment online yet? Is the indictment actually, or the indictments actually been published yet? Have we seen them?
I mean, all we know so far, I mean, all I saw, and I looked at an article that was literally about a half hour old, is that it's been 13 people and then three institutions, and that's vague. I'm not sure exactly what that could refer to. And they apparently were supporting Donald Trump, disparaging Clinton. So, and apparently there's a connection to the troll farm. So this might be, you know, some of the people that were posting social media ads or whatever, which, you know, that's an interesting premise that a couple Facebook ads that were seen by 300 people carry more weight than two huge political campaigns. But hey, you know, who am I? It's all my fault. We have Donald Trump anyway. All right. Let's see. More questions. We got a lot for you here. What should recalling Rendon be a priority?
Well, obviously, running for United States Senator, that's not something that United States Senators are involved in. It's a state issue. But I believe very strongly that what Anthony Rendon did with SB 562 was a travesty. The idea that frustrated me was this concept of, well, it's not prepared enough. We need to have hearings on this. We need to talk about these things before we ever put it out there. Well, that's not how legislation works. It's never how Sacramento's worked. If you want to look at an example of how Sacramento's works, look at the Delta tunnels and how they brought that to passage. Essentially, with the Delta tunnels, they didn't figure out a way to fund them. They didn't figure out a mechanism on how they were going to work. They basically passed them and then said, okay, we'll work it out once we get the legislation through. We'll work it out through the different water districts, through the different groups. We'll figure it all out. But they pushed it. And Rendon knew that. Rendon knows very well how legislation works. He deliberately just put the bill, hit it. And I do think that has been a major, major travesty. But again, that's not something a U.S. Senator actually deals with. And I actually love the woman who's running against him, Maria Estrada. Maria is terrific. And Maria, I would tell people, if you haven't taken a look at her website or taken a look at her, take a look. That's how we need to get rid of Rendon, because we need Maria in office. That is a fighter, and that's what we need. Maria doesn't take any guff, and that's exactly what we need in office.
We have Maria on the show on Wednesday, actually.
Oh.
Yeah. We usually only do one guest a week, but I heard like you were on your bus and you had a special thing going on, so I was like, well, we'll make an exception. Pat seems like a good dude. I like his hashtag. So let's get into this. This is something that, we really got to talk about. And, I said, I had David Hildebrand on the show. I said that, right now there are 3 progressives running in the race for Senate. I'd be happy to vote for, now I can say I'd be happy to vote for all 3 of them. At first I said Allison and David because I wasn't as familiar with you. I said with Pat Harris, I'm still learning about him. I don't know yet. But based on the legwork I've done and talking with you right now, I'm pretty sure I'd be happy to cast a vote for you too. So I'd be happy to vote for any of the 3 of you. What I'm concerned about, what a lot of citizens are concerned about, if we split that progressive vote 3 ways and none of you guys make it to the runoff, that's going to suck. Mm-hmm. That's really going to suck. So what's your take on that? How do we solve that problem?
Well, I think first thing we have to do is the actual date for getting on the ballot comes up. I think it's March 9th, March 6th or 9th. So let's see who's on the ballot, because sometimes there's surprises. And one of the things that may happen is we could get a Republican who actually comes in. And if the Republican gets someone with some name recognition or some ability, surprisingly enough, there was some talk about Caitlyn Jenner at one point coming in as a Republican candidate. But if we have a Republican candidate who has some name recognition, that's going to change the dynamics of the race dramatically. So I think first and foremost, we have to wait and see who's actually registered to be on the ballot. Once we do that, I know that March, April, May, we're going to have 3 months to sort this out. A huge part of it is going to be fundraising. Obviously, anybody who wants to run a statewide race has to raise the money to be able to run a statewide race. I think that will help sort of narrow the field somewhat. But there's no question that in the end, we all 3 of us, want to see Dianne Feinstein taken out of office. And all three of us don't believe that Kevin De Leon is the solution or is a true progressive. I've said it repeatedly that you cannot call yourself a progressive and take corporate money, because that is the essence of the progressive movement. It is the essence of Bernie Sanders' message. You can't say that. It is like saying, I'm going to be a vegetarian and I'm going to eat hamburger 4 nights a week. You just can't do it. So it does come down to three progressives. Let's see where things stand. We'll give it some time. And then, I have a good relationship with Allison, I have a good relationship with David. If it comes down to it, we can sit down and talk and see what we can do.
Well, do you think that will happen? I mean, is it going to? I mean, it seems like that's the natural thing that would happen, that the three of you would kind of sit down. And I think you should wait. I mean, March 9th is the deadline for filing. Joe in the chat points that out. So you have, after that, I mean, will you guys kind of get together and be like, okay, how do we make sure that one of us moves forward?
I don't think we'll have any problem. Like I said, I think we all have good relationships, so I don't think we'll have a problem doing that, sitting down and talking. But again, I want to see March 9th, because that could change dramatically. If there's an entrance of a Republican, it could change the dynamics dramatically, because unfortunately in this state, you put an R by somebody's name and you're going to get 18 to 20% of the vote. And that potentially has the ability to finish second right there. We've run the numbers, we've crunched the numbers, and it looks like a second place finish is going to be somewhere between 18 and 24%. So if a Republican gets in, it's gonna change dynamics dramatically, and we're all going to have to talk about what we're going to do then.
So if somebody, and I'm asking you this because I asked David this, and I'm going to ask Allison the same thing when she comes on, hopefully soon. I'll have different questions for De Leon and/or Feinstein, but but I'll ask you too. If one of the three of you and it's not you, say it's David or Allison, if one of them gets a big spike, for whatever reason, would you drop out?
I think there's no question, and I would hope Allison and David feel the same. If we are in May or early May or even maybe mid-May, and it's clear that one of the three of us is performing much better than the other two, absolutely. I mean, this cannot be a vanity project. It can't be for any of us. This is too important. The progressive movement and taking this seat in California, which is a largely progressive state, getting a progressive in office is got to be our #1 goal. And if it becomes very obvious that one of the three of us has the potential to do that, then yes. And if it's not me, I'll tell you right now, flat out, then yes, I will drop out, because I am not going to watch while we hurt progressive movement. Again, this is not a vanity project. It cannot be. It's got to be done in order to move progressives forward and to get this seat as a progressive seat.
Yeah, that's very good. David's answer was very similar to yours. He said that, yes, I would drop out unless the person going ahead is Pat, because Pat sucks. That was actually verbatim what he said. I'm kidding. Of course he didn't say that. No, his answer was basically the same as yours. All right. So we got some more questions here. Will you co-sponsor Senator Cory Booker's Marijuana Justice Act? And what is your stance on federal cannabis laws?
I am really glad you asked that question, because cannabis, the legalization of cannabis, is one of my top priorities. There's two things we have to discuss, and I wish I could spend 2 hours just talking about it. In fact, on Tuesday, I was in Adelanto. And if you don't know about Adelanto, it's a city out in San Bernardino that is attempting to become the Silicon Valley of cannabis. The mayor there is extraordinarily progressive. They are bringing in distribution centers. They're bringing in dispensaries. They're bringing in everything, growers, to make it an incredible area where cannabis can flourish, and to make it, as I said, the Silicon Valley of cannabis. That's on the right track, because #1, we have to look at economically what cannabis can do for this state. It can provide incredible resources for education, for infrastructure, for all the things we need. It absolutely has done wonders for Colorado, but beyond the economic value of it, what Colorado is showing, it is having effects on things like the opioid epidemic. They have seen opioid addictions drop in Colorado because people are using cannabis to get off their addictions. It's a way to help bring it down and to use to get away from the actual addictions. They're showing that dropping. They're showing domestic violence dropping in Colorado, and law enforcement attributes that to cannabis, because people, what you're actually seeing for the first time in certain areas, more people are buying cannabis than are buying alcohol. And as we all know, most of us from personal experience, cannabis isn't going to make you angry. It's not going to get you upset like alcohol will. So that's the reason for that, and that's why you're seeing drops in domestic violence. You're seeing drops in the use by teenagers, which everyone was so sure that it was going to be teenage use was going to increase. It's actually dropping. These are the things that we have to look at. We've got models now. We've got Colorado. We've got the state of Washington. We can see what's happened. And the legalization of cannabis has got to be a top priority federally, because it can help this country in so many ways economically, but it can also help solve some of the problems. Well, I won't use the word solve. It will help at least alleviate to some degree some of the problems this country are facing, like the opioid epidemic, like domestic violence. It can help on those things. And I believe very, very strongly that the cannabis industry, they are rallying behind me. They are helping to back me, because they understand we need a champion of the cannabis industry, and that's what I want to be.
All right. So going on that, someone else submitted, how do you separate yourself from the other progressives in your race?
Let's start with, again, I know that Kevin De Leon refers to himself as a progressive. And by the way, I think on a personal level, Kevin's done some good things in the state Senate. I like him on a personal level. He seems like a nice guy. And
don't be diplomatic here.
I just got to be honest. I like.
No,
him.
I know you gotta. No.
I like him on a personal level. But to say that you're a progressive, again, it goes back to what I said a few minutes ago. You can't say you're progressive and take corporate money. I don't care how many things you vote on. I don't care how you want to say about your record on the environment, your record on SB 562. The bottom line is you can't be a progressive and take corporate money. It is the essence of our movement. It is the essence of who we are. So that separates, I think, all three of us from Kevin to begin with. Now, as far as David and Allison, I think what you have to look at with the three of us is we are all running on pretty much the same platform with some differences. We have a few small differences of opinion on things, but we're all running on essentially the same platform. What it comes down to is who has the best chance of winning, who has the best chance to actually go in and take out both De Leon and take out Feinstein. The next few months, we're going to have to find that out. And I think that's what the next month or two of campaigning is about. I think for me, and my argument is, look, I have been someone who has fought. When people talk about, I'm going to go to Washington and fight, I don't have to talk about doing it. I've done it. I have a record of fighting for civil rights. I have a record of fighting, as I said earlier, against companies like Pfizer, of standing up to Wells Fargo and Bank of America, of taking on the Catholic Church. I've got a record that shows it's not just me saying I'm going to go to Washington and fight. I've done it. Secondly, I would say that I have gone all over the state. As some of you know, and we'll probably talk about later, I have an eco bus, and we drive all around the state. You may be able to see in the background, we're in Lake Tahoe right now with the mountains behind us. It's beautiful here. I did a talk with the Lake Tahoe Democratic Club last night. We are getting out. We are talking to people. We are actually having contact every single night. I have been doing things that no other candidate's doing, including the other progressives. For example, I mentioned I was touring the cannabis facilities on Tuesday. I was at the Trans Ball in Fresno on Saturday night, where we were rooting on one of our supporters, a guy who was running for Mr. Trans Fresno. I did a workshop for SB 562 on Saturday mornings. We're getting out and doing things that nobody else is doing, because we can't just talk the talk. We've got to be out listening to people. We've got to be out literally. When we talk, for example, about we believe in trans rights and helping people in the LGBT community, it's one thing to say it behind a computer. It's another thing to get out. And as like I said, Saturday night, we were at the Trans Ball talking to them, talking about what actually affects them and what they need, and listening to them. And I think that helps separate our campaign as well. But in the end, it goes back to, we'll find out hopefully in the next month or two who has the best shot at winning, because we all want to win.
So we got a couple questions here that kind of share some themes. So I'm gonna sort of like condense them into one thing here, and we can talk about the issue. Um, what is your take on Black Lives Matter and connecting that to issues of police brutality?
Well, Black Lives Matter, I've supported from the very beginning. As a criminal defense attorney and civil rights attorney, I obviously have been very involved in terms of the criminal justice system, and also in I've sued the police department, various police departments from all around the state for different violations of civil rights, and almost always they involve um, use of force against minorities, whether it be blacks or Hispanics or whatever minority group. The key here we have to focus on is education, the police departments. And you're starting to see a little bit of it, not even close to enough, but you are starting to see a little bit of it in groups like the LAPD and the San Diego Police Department, because they're starting to focus more on de-escalation, which is a real key here, versus weapons training. We know from history of the LAPD that at the 6-month academy, they would spend as much as 55 to 60% of their times on weapons training versus 4 to 5% of their time on actually de-escalating situations. That needs to be reversed. We have instances repeatedly where men and occasionally women are shot and killed, almost always minorities, and they don't have a weapon on them. Or they have a weapon, for example, a pipe. Just the other day in LA, there was an article about a gentleman who was shot because he had a pipe. Well, I defended actually an Asian American young gentleman who was shot and killed. I sued on behalf of his family, who had a pipe, and he was walking down the street, and the police basically jumped in front of him, said stop. He turned, walked in a different direction, and they shot him. And their argument was exactly the same as this one I just read about yesterday. He could have been swinging that pipe. He could have killed somebody. Well, there were 100 different things they could have done to do other than shoot him, and they chose not to. We've got to go back to that. We've got to go forward to that. We have to learn to teach de-escalation. And I will tell you just real quickly, amazingly, and I think this is something people may want to Google, a police officer in West Virginia went into a situation. There was a gentleman, I don't remember, he had a weapon, it may have been a gun. And this police officer refused to shoot. And he was talking to the guy. And he was actually diffusing the situation. 2 police officers showed up. Within a minute, they shot, killed the man. They kept their jobs. The police officer who refused to shoot lost his job.
Wow.
You can Google that. He is actually suing. He actually lost his job because of that, because he was focusing on de-escalating the situation. The others just got there and shot. And again, it was a minority.
Well, don't you think this is one of those things? Because I say, and I'm with you on the training, but I think it's deeper than that. I think there is a true systemic problem in law enforcement that, I mean, training's a big part of it, yeah, but it also goes into screening. It goes into the culture that they subscribe to. It goes into just all of that. I mean, I mean, there's members of the KKK that are police officers.
Yes.
That shouldn't happen. That shouldn't happen. You shouldn't be able to, just do a basic Google search and find this stuff out and be like, how did this person become a police officer? That's something that should have been nipped in the bud out the get-go, and they never should have gotten that job ever. They're over militarized to the nth degree. You have towns of like 8,000 people that have tanks. What do they need a tank for other than to make a really bad decision drunk on a Saturday night sometime? There's no reason for it at all. They're over militarized. They're not trained properly. And the system as a whole doesn't screen properly or prepare properly. And we have this, I mean, it's a borderline legal gang at this point.
Well, in some cases, they do have gangs. I know you're familiar with some of the police departments were outed a few years ago where they were had actual gangs within the police department. I think one of them was called the Vikings, and I can't remember what the others were called, but there were literally gangs where they had symbols and where their entire mission was to go around and basically abuse minorities. And you're right about screening. I would agree with you 100% on screening, but let me tell you about another practice that occurs that's very problematic. Most young police officers, excuse me, in sheriff's departments, especially this always happens in Orange County, but other counties as well, the first job they're assigned to do is to go work in the jails, to basically go in and oversee and work with the cells and work with the prisoners there. Now, what this does is they have no training whatsoever in how to do it and how to handle prisoners. They certainly have no training on how to handle the mentally ill who we're now warehousing in jails. They have no ability to handle this. So what happens is their first experience as a police officer is an extraordinarily negative one. Extraordinarily negative, because they're dealing with prisoners who are, some of them are bad. Some of them are throwing things at them. Some of them are threatening them. The mentally ill are throwing feces at them and things like that. That's their first experience as a police officer. So now they have this negative sort of feelings toward the very people they're supposed to be protecting. That's their first, and they may do this for 2 or 3 years, and that's their first sort of introduction to it. Then we send them out on the streets. And now we're sending out on the streets an angry person who believes that anybody who is a minority or somebody who is out on the, maybe living in a bad area is automatically, they're going to have a negative connotation. That's how we're sending them out on the streets. That needs to stop as well. That's a real problem. Uh-oh.
No, I'm here. Sorry about that. I forgot to unmute my mic. So how do we begin to implement a green energy revolution? First of all, what is your take on energy and renewable energy and green jobs? Secondly, assuming you're for it, which I'm going to go out on a limb, say you are, how do we begin to implement a green energy revolution?
All right. I think we've gone above and beyond in terms of not only just talking about what we believe to be the future of renewable energy, but as I mentioned earlier, we have an eco bus. We actually took a 1980 school bus and we totally redid it so that we put solar panels on the roof. The entire inside, everything inside runs on solar energy. The bus itself runs on ethanol, and everything in it is, almost everything in it is recycled material. Everything from the floors all the way up to the curtain rods. And we're now trying to order the cushions to be hemp cushions. Everything in is designed to show and demonstrate. So we drive this bus around and we take people in, we give tours, and we talk to them about the future and how the future of this country, especially things like buses and like mass transit, how we can actually turn this into positive things ecologically. I think that as a campaign, like I said, we not only talk about it a lot, we actually demonstrate it through the use of the bus. That's the first thing. To get into specifics of it, I think that one of the things we have to do is, we talk a lot about in this country about wind and solar and water energy and the need to be 100% renewable, and that's extremely important. There's no question. I think every candidate, though, sort of every Democratic candidate, pretty much agrees with that. We see the future. It's got to be renewable, and yes, we need to push it. But there are things that we need to do to actually reverse global warming. First and foremost is regenerative agriculture, and that's something that's not being talked about, and it is probably the single most important thing we could do to start reversing the effects of regenerative agriculture. Reverse the effects of global warming by using regenerative agriculture. This is a process where you stop the tilling, where you actually come in and plant certain plants, where carbon is being drawn back out of the atmosphere. It actually reverses the process and it brings it back into the soil. Now, what this does is it actually provides for additional water storage so that farmers can make more money, they have better crops, and they can survive through droughts much easier. Those are the kind of innovative things we need to push. And here's the thing, Ron, that I think makes this extraordinarily doable. It makes it profitable, more profitable for farmers. We have people who are already out there. We have a friend of the campaign who works with us who is actually working on a bill. It is bipartisan, and they're getting Republican support. And the reason they're getting Republican support is the Republicans realize when the bill's explained to them, this is a way for farmers to actually increase their production and increase their profits. Democrats aren't going to make hay by going out and talking to farmers about global warming. But if you go to farmers and you talk to them about a profit and increasing that profit, their ears perk up and you're going to listen. Those are the kind of programs we need to be talking about, in addition to talking about the renewables and going to solar and wind and water.
You know, it's interesting you brought up cooperation with farms because, you know, in the news this week, there was that whole thing, or maybe it was last week at this point, but where Donald Trump wants to gut food stamps and instead give people like a box of non-perishable food. And, you know, obviously this with this administration is just some, you know, another effort at privatization. It's just an effort to, you know, cut corners and just, you know, shame poor people even more. But if somebody were to implement kind of a different take on that, where as a mix, like, and I thought, like, what if somebody actually came at this with the right intentions and say they did something like the government gets more involved in subsidizing farms and then local farms provide people in need with maybe a crop share every week in addition to food stamps. Man, that could be something that could actually really help people's lives and could actually help our country as a whole. And wouldn't that be something? But of course, that's not the intention here. The intentions are in the wrong place. But if they were in the right place, a similar idea might actually be something positive. What do you think?
I think you're not only on the right track, but I think, and I wish I could cite it to you, but I know there is a gentleman in South Dakota who is actually proposing and pushing that very thing, who is a farmer. I know that they're doing some similar programs in upstate New York. I'm sorry, Ron. I know I've read so many things, especially lately, that sometimes I forget where I've read them. But exactly what you're talking about is being implemented in certain areas where you're getting these organic farms who are actually being subsidized by the government to provide fresh fruits, vegetables for the local communities and for people, especially people who cannot afford them and who can come in with vouchers and actually go to these organic farms and get these fresh vegetables and fruits and things like that. It's actually being done. What you're talking about is being done. It's just not being done, and it's not being advertised and pushed enough. I do know, and I'm sorry, I just cannot remember the guy's name, but there is a gentleman out of South Dakota who's very well known. I think it could probably be Googled, who has been pushing this now for several years. He's becoming successful, and they have actually got it so that in places like upstate New York, Maryland, I think Maryland's also doing it. So there are other areas doing exactly what you're suggesting.
That's great. And Bella Ryan in the chat here actually points that out, that there's certain WIC programs that give vouchers for farmers markets and stuff like that. And
yes.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I mean, Pat, and we have this in common, and I'm sure you feel the same way I do. I really fell in love with the Southern Bounty. When I lived in Nashville, I had a local crop share. I knew my farmers. I would talk to them. They would talk about what was in the box each week. And it was not only just a rewarding experience, and it gave me, you know, fresh organic produce every week, but it was also very cost effective.
Yes.
I saved so much money because I would just base my groceries around what I got in the box each week. And they made it very, I mean, it was an affordable thing. It was enough food for about 4 people. So what me and my girlfriend at the time did is we would split it with another couple. So it was very affordable. And then we would just build our grocery list around what we got in the box. If we got a lot of greens that we wanted to make smoothies with at the grocery store that week, we'd buy a lot of yogurt and fruit. If we got some other like tomatoes or garlic, well, maybe we were going to buy some pasta and make a fresh garden pasta. You get the idea. And that is something that I just thought was a really special thing. And I would always try to push people to it. Bella Ryan points out that she grew up in Montana, pretty much lived off of the land. All right, so we got some more questions for you.
Sure.
A and a 2 wants to know, how long have you lived in California? When did you leave England? How long have you lived in California?
I actually lived in California in the 80s. I lived here for about 4 years. Then I got accepted to Michigan Law School. And so I went to law school in Michigan after Stanford wouldn't take me. They just refused to take me. I begged and pleaded with them, and they just said, no, sorry, you're not smart enough. So I ended up.
You'll get the last laugh, man, because when you're in the Senate,
that's right. I'm going to outlaw.
You'll show them.
So I went to Michigan Law School from California. After that, as I said, I went to Nashville to work in the public defender's office. I was there a little over 2.5, I think about 2.5 years or so, I think. And then I actually got a case involving someone that was close to me. that brought me out to California to work on her case. It was a girlfriend I had at the time. And so I came out to California, and that was 94, I think, 95 maybe. And I've been in California ever since. So I've been here approximately 23 years now, on top of the 4 or 5 years I spent in the 80s. So overall, I guess you could say I've been here about 30 years.
All right. So here's a light one for you. Do you like sports? And, how about you give a little 411 on what sports you're into, if so?
Boy, I have 2 addictions in life. One of them, unfortunately, is Diet Coke, which I am getting off of. I have had.
That's a bad one, dude.
That's a bad one. And I've had it for 20 or 30 years. And so I try, when I travel, it's hard for me to do it because I don't really have an alternative too much. I try to drink water, but I find myself still drinking a Diet Coke or 2 a day. My second addiction is sports. I love college football. That is my favorite single thing. I grew up in Arkansas, so the Arkansas Razorbacks are my passion out of that. I actually worked for a year for the Texas Rangers baseball team. And interestingly enough, when I worked for the baseball team, the owner was George W. Bush at the time. And I tell people, I never met him, but he was described to me a lot like people. He was described a lot like my dog Boomer, which was, he's a very nice guy, but just not very bright. So yes, I love sports. College football is my favorite. Baseball is a close second. Sadly enough, I'm a Clippers fan, which, well, part of my problem is just about every team I follow is not successful. So I love sports, but I understand the agony of defeat because all of my teams seem to have much more in terms of losing than winning. So, but yes, I'm a huge sports fan.
All right. So we got a nice transition here, fortunately, because somebody else wants to know, what is your stance on college tuition? What do we do about that?
Well, we've talked a lot about, in this campaign, we've talked a lot about what we need to do as far as providing free education for college students. And we've talked about, on the reverse side of that, what we're going to do with the student loan debt that students who are out now have already accumulated. So starting with free college education, my frustration with the Democratic Party, part of my frustration is that we used to, as a Democratic Party, we used to actually propose ideas. We used to come up with innovative things. We used to come up with ideas, and then we would test them out. We would run things through. We'd find out. We would actually held hearings, and we would find out what would work, what wouldn't. I got frustrated during the campaign because Bernie Sanders presented a program for free college education in public schools. Immediately, the Democratic Party, he hadn't proposed it more than half a day, and the Democratic Party part of it, the establishment, the news organizations started pouncing on him. You can't do that. You can't even try it. We're not going to listen to that. It's too expensive. It's too this. We can't be implemented. That is not the party I grew up with, and that's the party so many millennials are frustrated with and want to leave, because what are you going to do when you hear a party say, we're not even going to try? We're not even going to make an effort. We're not even going to see if it'll work. He proposed an idea that should have been discussed and should be, and I absolutely agree with, by the way. And it should have been something that should be on the table, and we should be talking about so that people can get a free college education, not only for people in 4-year colleges, but people in community colleges, people in vocational schools. That needs to be something on the table. Absolutely. The second thing is we have to deal with the student loan debt, because it is a serious problem, mostly for millennials. I've talked about that. I have several things I think we need to discuss. Number one, we have to buy back the loans. The government needs to buy back the loans from private corporations, because we're never going to get anything done as long as private organizations are looking to make a profit off student loans. The government has to buy the loans back. Secondly, once the government buys the loans back, what we have to do is implement a program where we drop the interest rates either to a very low percent, a 1 or 2%, or a 0%, depending on what we think we can do. And thirdly, people should be rewarded for taking public service jobs or for doing community service, even in addition to their job, by having their student loans reduced. So that's what I believe our plan is.
All right. So what are your thoughts on S-532, the Stop Arming Terrorists Act?
I got to tell you, in all honesty, I'm a very strong person in terms of my beliefs that we have totally in the way we look at foreign policy and the way we look at terrorism, we have gone in the exact opposite direction that we need to go. We are looking at terrorists as being what we see from Al-Qaeda first, and then obviously from ISIS. And we see these groups and we see what they do in the Middle East. We see what they do even in Europe. And on occasion, what they do in the United States. But terrorism is not something that is an ISIS or Al-Qaeda only related issue. Terrorism in this country, the vast majority of terrorism in this country, has been committed by white supremacists. The vast majority. We talk about terrorism, and we always want to talk about immediately what the Republicans have done and some Democrats have done has immediately make the association with ISIS. The association ought to be with the Dylan Roos of this world. It ought to be with the Timothy McVeighs of this world. It ought to be with the gentleman Nicholas Cruz, who we already know from yesterday is a white supremacist. Until we start realizing that these are the people that we need to be stop arming and make sure that they can't go forward, this is what we're going to have to do to stop actual terrorist events in this country, or at least lessen them dramatically. You're always going to have Al-Qaeda, you're always going to have ISIS, because you're going to have in the Middle East groups that they just cannot, people who cannot survive because there's no employment, they're starving. In many cases, there's no water. That in itself is going to result in people uprising and people going against the establishment, and eventually they're going to become angry enough to become armed. You're always going to have that.
So are you against the overinflated military budgets? That was a follow-up question somebody had.
Oh my gosh. I do about a 15-minute rant on that, on the Defense Department, because it's one of the main issues I have with Senator Feinstein. She keeps voting for budget increases by the Defense Department. The Defense Department budget needs to be cut, period, end of story. It needs to be cut dramatically. What we have done in this country is we have screwed up our priorities, where we actually think that we're protecting our public by continuing to give the Defense Department bombers they won't use. There's a study that showed by the Defense Department in its own audit, they wasted $125 billion over 5 years in administrative costs, not weapons, not wars, in administrative costs. We keep pumping money in this Defense Department. In the meantime, we are cutting money for medical technology, for medical advances that could cure diseases like Alzheimer's, help with things like diabetes. These are the things that are killing our people. It's not foreign countries that are killing us. It's things like diseases. It's things like our quality of life is being cut back on. Our education budgets are being cut back on. These things are being cut back on because we have to feed the Defense Department. It needs to stop. Winston Churchill has a very famous quote from World War II, which I use frequently, which I always loved. When his Defense Department minister came to him during World War II and said, we've got to raise funds for the war. We've come up with a plan to cut education. We've come up with a plan to cut the arts, and we can cut back on healthcare. And Winston Churchill famously said, well, exactly what are we fighting for then? That's what we have to sort of look at in this country. If we're going to continue just to pour money in the Defense Department and watch while our quality of life decreases, our healthcare decreases, our environment decreases, what exactly are we putting money in there for? What are we fighting for? I am a huge proponent of cutting the Defense Department budget, and I make that a centerpiece of this campaign.
I'm totally with you there. Although Winston Churchill has also said a lot of things that have gotten on my nerves a lot. But but that quote's a good one. That quote's a good one. Pat, we are out of time. Thank you so much for doing this. So let's use this time. I'm going to give my send-off after you, but you go ahead and go first. Where can people learn more about you? Where can they learn about your campaign? Where can they get involved should they be interested?
The best thing to do is to go to the website. The website is Pat Harris for, spelled out, F-O-R, Senate.com. On the website, you can volunteer. If you want to write a couple of $1 million in a check, you're welcome to write that. You can contribute, obviously. We take no corporate donations, so we generally, most of our donations are $5, $10, $15, $20 donations, which we appreciate very much. But people can get involved through the website. We are also have a Facebook page. We have the social media. But what I would really ask people to do is this, if they have the opportunity. We are everywhere. We are traveling over the state. As I said, we're in Tahoe today. We're in Redding tomorrow. We're in San Francisco on Friday and Saturday. We're in Modesto on Monday. We're coming back to LA. I would ask people, look at our Facebook, see where we are. Come out and hit me with questions. Come out and talk to me. That's how we're going to get this thing done. That's how we're going to win this election, by contact, by actually seeing people. Come out and see me. Come out and talk to me. Come out and yell at me if you want. You've been in a comedy club. You know how much fun it is to have hecklers. Come out and heckle me. Whatever you want to do.
They'll come heckle you, man. They'll be like, Razorbacks suck. And you'll be like, I didn't sign up for this. Damn it.
Which they would unfortunately be right about, because I can't respond to that one.
All right, Pat, throw that website out one more time, would you?
It's Pat Harris for FOR Senate.com.
Pat Harris for Senate.com. Guys, check it out. This has been Get Your News On with Ron, the world's first viewer-curated streaming news show. What does that mean? That means you guys send me articles, and that's what we talk about. Or when we have a guest, you guys submit the questions, and that's what they got to answer. You guys had some great questions for Pat. A lot of similar themes, which was really good. We were able to put it together nice and cohesively. I am trying to get this up to 2 hours. How can you help? You can join the Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Placone. At any level you're comfortable giving, you get an exclusive podcast every week. You get exclusive another piece of content, either writing or a video every week. And also any of my shows throughout the country, whether I'm playing in Los Angeles or Little Rock, Arkansas, you get to go for that show for free. You just let me know. All my shows are free for my patron. So if you are so able, please consider patreon.com/Ron Placone. Help me get a monitor behind me. Help me compensate the people that help me out, because they are so grossly underpaid right now. It's unbelievable. So patreon.com/Ron Placone. Follow me on Twitter @Ron Placone, ronplacone.com. Find out when I'm coming to a city near you. I'm going to be on the road with Graham Elwood. Got some live Jimmy Dore show dates coming up, so I will be announcing a bunch of stuff soon. Thank you guys very much. Pat, again, thank you so much. Guys, we do this every Tuesday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Have a great weekend. I love you all very much. I will see you Tuesday. Pat Harris, thank you once again.
Thank you.